But look, I'm going to go to my guests. But if you guys dig what I'm putting down on this show, give it a like, share it, subscribe to it. You can become a member. You can give super chats. Like I said, buy me a coffee. And I thank all of you for joining me. And I thank all of you for doing so. And I want to go to one of my favorite people to talk to, the one, the only, Margaret Kimberley. How you doing
Morning.
this morning?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. Margaret Kimberley is a senior columnist and editor for Black Agenda Report and author of Presidential, Black America, and Presidents. Happy New Year, by the way.
Happy New Year to you. Good to be back.
Let's start with your article in Black Agenda Report. I want to start with that first,
Okay.
because you pointed this out about Jimmy Carter. And so I'm glad you mentioned this. I actually put it on my Twitter account because I wanted to bring it up. Go into that for me. What was your take on Jimmy Carter? I don't know if I had the opportunity to talk to you about Jimmy Carter, but what was your take on Jimmy Carter? You wrote the book on presidents.
Yes.
What relation did he have to Black America?
Well, like it was very interesting during, I'll just shamelessly plug my book, Presidential, Black America and the
Please
President.
do. Is that shameless? Go
And
for it.
when he ran for president in 1976, I was a teenager at the time, but I remember it quite well. Black people were concerned, frankly, about having a Southerner at the top of the ticket, Black people being Democrats. And at that time, as we saw with Jimmy Carter, white Southerners, many of them were still Democrats. It had not, those states had not turned completely Republican. But there was concern about someone from the segregated South, even in the years after the liberation movement, having a Southern president. And we were sure there was a new South. And we should not worry that there was some old school segregationist that was going to be in the White House. But then he made a statement about ethnic purity. At the time, school busing was a hot issue. And he said we can maintain ethnic purity of neighborhoods. He sees nothing wrong with that. He also made a comment about Black intrusion. Now, he walked it back. He made a very public apology. So that's my first thoughts about Carter and Black people. But he was a conservative. He, like always happens with presidents, Reagan, who defeated him, expanded upon that kind of conservatism. But he was a very conservative Democrat. And there were not... I don't believe any big gains for Black people, for anybody who wanted wants the government to play that kind of a role.
Well, he was different than the New Deal Democrats, right? Like, from my understanding, he was this kind of intermediary changeover between New Deal Democrats and Bill Clinton, where Bill Clinton was this kind of third-way Democrat, where Jimmy Carter was something in between. Correct me if I'm wrong, though.
You're correct about that, but we see this trajectory of Carter being more conservative than Nixon, Reagan being more conservative than Carter, Bush continuing Reaganism, Bill Clinton allegedly being a Democrat, but the one who got rid, whose welfare, quote unquote, reform ended the right to seek public assistance that had existed since the days of FDR. So we see this trajectory of a further and further rightward tilt in the presidency. But Carter, after he left office, he, unlike other presidents, he didn't make a lot of money. He was known for his charitable works, especially Habitat for Humanity, building houses. And there's a famous picture of him. He'd fallen as a senior citizen. He has this black eye, and he's still hammering away, building a house somewhere. And that's how people think of him. To his credit, and I will give credit where it's due, the Carter Foundation, we were told, resolved disputes all over the world and did good works and brought medicine to poor people and all kinds of nice things. But it turns out these presidents, I feel like they're never former presidents, even in his work with the Carter Center abroad. And I reminded people that it was his administration that began this policy of the U.S. arming jihadist groups. He and Zbigniew Brzezinski in Afghanistan in the late 70s armed people like Osama bin Laden, who I don't know if we'll ever be able to talk about the fact that he was once a U.S. ally, but
Yep.
he was. And that this September 11th was blowback from those connections. So that's what he did as president. As a former president, the Carter Center played a terrible role in Haiti. I gave that example. By this time, 1990, it was Bush 43, who,
Hmm.
or was it 40? I can't remember the numbers now. Anyway, Bush 41 and 43, yes? Yes, Bush 41, Papa Bush, was president. The Carter Foundation, so Haiti was finally having democratic elections in 1990. People wanted Jean Bertrand Aristide.
Right.
Carter goes down there and says to Aristide on election day, well, you should stand down because there might be violence. Now, the people wanted Aristide, and he won overwhelmingly. But he wasn't who the U.S. wanted, because he wanted an independent, sovereign Haiti that should help its people. And that's not in the interest of the Haitian elite or their friends in Washington. So they tried to undercut Aristide, who was president at that point for a very short time. He was overthrown by the military. Now Bill Clinton is president in 94.
Hmm.
And the Black Caucus, who at the time actually played an important role in foreign policy, in speaking up, they asked Bill Clinton to help return Aristide. Of course, it was turned into the U.S. invading Haiti again.
Yep.
The U.S. invaded and occupied Haiti for 20 years, from 1915 until the 30s. So, and the Carter administration played a role there as well, the Carter Foundation, rather. So I
Hmm.
just wanted to remind people that even if you have a warm, fuzzy feeling about a particular president, especially Jimmy Carter, he lived to be 100. He was building houses, all kinds of good things. They still do what presidents do. They
Yeah.
uphold U.S. Interests as defined by militarism and by imperialism.
I will give Carter credit on the Gaza issue. He seemed to have been a tireless, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, advocate for. I mean, Carter was the first president that I heard that talked about it on some level of honesty, where he pointed out, like, look, these are resistance groups. Israel is an occupation, etc. Like, meaning it's an apartheid state. Like,
Mhm.
these are words that I've never heard come out of a president, short of somebody like Jimmy Carter. But again, correct me if I'm wrong on this. I could be,
You are correct. You are correct. He's the, when people would ask him, do you think it's fair to refer to Israel as an apartheid state? He would say, yes, it is. And
yeah,
he talked about talking with the PLO and Hamas. By the
yep,
way, Israel promoted Hamas in order
yes,
to
they did.
undercut the PLO. So
Yes, they
this
did.
idea that they're just some, evil force that's out to kill all the Jewish people is just untrue. But
What does?
Carter
No, no,
Carter
please
did
continue. I'm sorry.
Carter did advocate for the U.S. being an honest broker
Right.
in Israel, instead of just being the subservient nation like that it is now. Biden, by the way, who's about to leave office, thank God. Yes, I say that even though Trump is the one following him.
Oh,
Biden
I say it too. I say
has
it.
armed Israel more than any other president in one term. More money, more weapons, more death, and they are helping Israel ethnically cleanse Gaza up until January 20th. So Trump can step in, and he says if they don't return the hostages, there's going to be hell to pay. Of course, Israel has scuttled every plan to get the hostages back, lest we forget. But destroying hospitals, kidnapping doctors, bombing refugee camps, everything down the line, anything Israel wants, that's where we are now. And so we miss someone like Carter, who was willing to at least talk about the possibility of having a different kind of policy with Israel.
Ironically, before Donald Trump got into politics, he had this conversation with Netanyahu, and I believe it was Mahmoud Abbas. And I know people hate Abbas just because he's at this point just kind of working with Israel, but
Mhm.
that to the side. Trump ended up coming out with this assessment that he hated Netanyahu, that Netanyahu effectively didn't want a deal or didn't want to solve the conflict. He basically wanted to take it all. And that wasn't the impression that he got from Abbas. Fast forward to today, where you have an entirely new Donald Trump with $50 million in his pocket, that is an incentivized point of view. So the reason why I say that is on his Truth Social, Trump put out this kind of Jeffrey Sachs piece where
Yes.
he was. Did you see that?
I could not believe it. Jeffrey Sachs, I'm a big fan of, and I know Sachs has had a problematic past, his role in Russia in the 90s and
Yeah.
so forth. But now he's this voice for sanity of reason, opposing U.S. policies in Israel, in Ukraine, a person who because he operated at those upper echelons, his points of view are very important. And I could not believe that Donald Trump was quoting Jeffrey Sachs and included this video of Sachs in his post. It was incredible.
I'll play a piece of this just so the people would know. I played it earlier, but just when I clip this, I just want this to be in it because I was shocked by this. I don't want to get your take on what the hell is going on, because two things are taking place simultaneously. In one sense, Axios is talking about a pressure campaign where they're trying to get Trump to attack Iran, effectively saying that this needs to be done now. Iran is this kind of breakout time where they can get a bomb. Now, the irony of this is that Iran is doing this for the same reasons that North Korea is doing this. Israel has a nuclear bomb. Everybody knows that Israel has a nuclear bomb. Iran, at this point, has lost Syria, and they are under this massive amount of threat where the U.S. is continuously talking about attacking it, going all the way back to before Obama, and even after the overthrow where they got rid of the Shah. And so there have been this consistent pressure campaign that the U.S. has put on it for decades. And now it's culminating to Israel going on a murder spree all throughout the Middle East, where, they feel insecure, as they should feel insecure in this moment. So now it's like, hey, we recognize that they feel insecure, so now we need to bomb them into the Stone Age. Okay, fair enough. Trump puts out this video, and like I said, I want to get your take on it. I don't know what's going on with this, but let's play it.
And you may actually hear from grown-up reporters who are lying through their teeth or ignorant beyond imagining that, oh, the war in Syria, yes, Russia intervened in Syria. Well, do you know that that Obama tasks the CIA to overthrow the Syrian government, starting 4 years before Russia intervened? What kind of nonsense is that? And how many times did the New York Times report on Operation Timber Sycamore, which was the presidential order to the CIA to overthrow Bashar al-Assad? 3 times in 10 years. This is not democracy. This is a game. And it's a game of narrative. Why did the U.S. invade Iraq in 2003? Well, first of all, it was completely phony pretenses. It wasn't, oh, we were so wrong, they didn't have weapons of mass destruction. They actually did focus groups in the fall of 2002 to find out what would sell that war to the American people. Abe Schultzky, if you want to know the name of the PR genius. They did focus groups on the war. They wanted the war all the time. They had to figure out how to sell the war to the American people, how to scare the shit out.
That's astonishing. Like, give me your take on that. What is... I know you can't tell me what's in Trump's head. I don't even know if Trump knows what's in Trump's head. But what is your thinking? Why is he putting this out? I mean, do you think it's when Donald Trump got in, he said, I'm going to end wars, not start wars? And is it this pressure campaign that's taking place? Meaning, if I'm right, and Donald Trump, this point of view that he has for Israel, especially around this issue of Netanyahu, is, let's say, motivated by the amount of money that he got. It's not his real point of view. What does this mean? And I'm talking too much about it. Give me your take on this. What do you think is going on here?
You know, I have the same questions about Trump. He talks a good game. Part of the reason he was able to win in the Electoral College in 2016 was he talked about stopping wars, which tells you that's what most Americans want. Not to have wars, although liberals are the big warmongers nowadays. But anyway, that's a whole other story. So I think his inclination of America first is for the U.S. to be less involved around the world. I think personally, that's the real Donald Trump, dare I say.
Yeah.
However, once he became president, what did he do? The pressure campaign against Iran. Now, he was being pushed to start a war with Iran. He decided not to. He did assassinate the Iranian general Soleimani in 2000, which every Democratic candidate at the time applauded him for, lest we forget. The maximum pressure campaign. He took the U.S. out of the nuclear deal with Iran that Obama, to his credit, I hardly ever give him credit for anything, but he changed that. So it's hard to say what he really will do. Now, I will also mention Ukraine here because most Republicans wanted to end funding for Ukraine, and not because they're like me and think the U.S. should mind its own business, but because they think the U.S. should be antagonizing China instead of Russia. But anyway, so Republicans wanted to end funding, and Trump said that's what he wants. But at the end of the day, he's the one who did the deal. He's the one who pressured Mike Johnson. They told the few Republicans, Marjorie Taylor Greene and others, to pipe down, and this is how it was going to be. So we see presidents sometimes, regardless of what they want, their personal vision, they succumb. They succumb to the weapons manufacturers. They succumb to people called, say, the deep state. So I think this is very, very interesting that we would have Trump quoting Jeffrey Sachs. Now, partly I think it's because Jeffrey Sachs was criticizing Obama in that clip. So I'm sure that was part of his motivation. And as you said, you never know what's in Trump's head, but it's interesting. But I, having witnessed his acts in the past and remembering his presidency, I doubt this means Trump is going to be the peacemaking president that we really ought to have.
No, I agree with you. There's a part in that clip where he says Netanyahu is a sick son of a bitch. And it's like, wow. I just thought, wow.
I think they're working together. Biden gets to be the bad guy. Biden, they just gave another tranche of money, millions of dollars to Israel. Biden's going to continue the genocide, and then Trump will step in. So I just have a feeling they're coordinating this. And then they've killed as many Palestinians as they can. They've accelerated, escalated their ethnic cleansing, and then January 20th comes along and Trump says, you see, now we're going to have a ceasefire agreement or something like that. That's what I predict will happen.
Israel, there's reporting out that they have plans for Gaza that are just like ghastly. These kind of concentration camps where they're breaking the areas. But we'll see. We'll see. We'll see. Trump did tell the Muslim community, I'm going to end this war. I'm going to end this war. So who knows? Who knows?
I'm not holding my breath that he would actually do that, though.
Exactly, because that's going to.
Or if he does, it's part of a coordinated plan.
So I want to go to something that I am fascinated by. So do you remember when Chuck Schumer said this? Because I know a lot of these lefties always get on board when Democrats are trying to, run an election. Bernie Sanders just goes out there, oh, you got to vote for whatever random milquetoast Democrat, and this person is the most progressive and blah, 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 blah. He does it all the time. And many of these lefties will get out there and do it. Roucana, AOC, all of them. But what they never really get is that Democrats don't like them very much. There was a reason that they didn't vote for AOC for that committee seat. And oftentimes what they want to do is get more moderates where they don't have to cater to these lefty policies and do these kind of big lift in regards to policy. Now, Chuck Schumer articulated this very clearly right here.
This is the second point. For every blue-collar Democrat we will lose in Western PA, we will pick up 2-3 moderate Republicans in the suburbs of Philadelphia. And you can repeat that in Ohio and Illinois and Wisconsin.
All right. So that's when Chuck said that. Chuck got exactly what he wanted in this election because the Washington Post, I believe this is Washington Post, but the article points out, I had the article just up and then I got rid of the article, but the article right here. So the article points out in exit polling that Chuck Schumer got what he wanted. It just wasn't enough to win. So exit polls from the U.S. presidential election indicated that approximately 15-point swing towards Donald Trump among voters earning less than $50,000 a year, the poorest bloc of voters in the United States. For the first time since the 1960s, a majority of Americans in a low-income bracket voted Republican. At the other end of the spectrum or the scale, the most affluent voters shifted to Democrats. According to the voter survey in exit polls, Vice President Kamala Harris scored a majority of votes from those making more than $100,000 a year, the top third of their income distribution. Chuck Schumer got exactly what he wanted, and it wasn't enough. I mean,
Well,
this is so ridiculous, right? Like, why would it be enough? You have a 1% versus 90% of the population that he just basically ignored. Give me your take on this.
well, that clip you showed was from 2016, and he was speaking that summer before the election. This whole notion, wishful thinking that there are these moderate Republicans who would vote for Hillary Clinton instead of Trump. Can we please stop talking about these moderate Republicans? The moderate Republicans now are the Democrats, frankly. But anyway,
Right.
but he was wrong, and that quote has been played numerous times as proof of how badly they failed when Hillary Clinton lost in the Electoral College. But this now, I think it's very simple what's happening now. The Democrats haven't done anything for the people.
Right.
And because they haven't, the Republicans get to have these gains among lower income people. I've said this before, I will say it again. One of the reasons Kamala Harris lost is that those COVID programs disappeared. There were people who were surviving on those stimulus payments seemed to be small, but they were paying somebody's rent or their car note, or the child tax credit was huge.
Yes.
And then it was just gone.
In 1 year.
And people were kicked off Medicaid, kicked off of SNAP. So, and there was never any explanation because the Democrats, because they're also captives of the corporate parties, captives of wealthy people, they will not say, they could have said, we wanted to extend these programs, but the Republicans said no. But they don't want to do that. So people quite rightly say, well, what have you done for me lately? Mansion and cinema. Of course, there's always a mansion in a cinema, isn't there? And so what was I saying? Yes. So this lack of attention to working class people we now see the result of that, where people are now, the Republicans aren't going to do anything either, but this party that sold itself, and remember, and they oversold it when Biden first came into office, the most progressive president since FDR. He'll cut child poverty in half. The lies about raising the minimum wage, all of those things came back to bite them, and that is why we're seeing this shift.
If they would have raised the minimum wage, that would have been huge. If they would have if they would have kept the child tax credit, that was huge. I mean, like my mom, like we struggled over the course of growing up as a child. That money would have been tremendous in our life. And I would have to imagine that would have been tremendous in somebody else's life, where they would have had a kid and would have been able to get that, $300 or whatever that amount of money was for that kid. That was huge. It was almost like a Social Security for kids.
Yes.
Yes. And from my point of view, if we indeed say we care about Americans and we care about our children and the youth is the future, then we want that youth and that future to have a decent upbringing, because how that kid is brought up is going to be how that kid ends up. And so it's like, that's a great thing. They did it for a year, and then all of a sudden it fell apart. And it was like, oh, Joe Manchin in the Senate. And they said, okay, well, are you willing to get rid of the filibuster in order to do it? Nope, we're not willing to do that. Okay, so you're not willing to do anything to push this through, meaning You have no provocative action. You have no big ticket plan. This is just a nothing presidency. And then they want a repeat. It's out of denial. And to your point, they are aiming for moderate Republicans for that exact reason of corporate capture, that they have to go to the rich and say, hey, I know you don't need health care. I know you don't need education. I know you have money where you don't need Social Security, but could you please allow us to run a campaign that raises these things? And of course, they're going to say, no, we don't need this.
Exactly. And so we have this oligarchic class. It always cracks me up. They talk about oligarchs in Russia or somewhere else. We've got oligarchs right here.
Right.
They control both parties, and they have made it clear they do not want any help for the people. They want they want a race to the bottom. They want austerity, not just in government spending, but they want the people held down. They want us to live like dogs. And they do not want, they are adamantly opposed to any assistance that the people need. And that's why there's this death by 1,000 cuts of SNAP or Medicaid, or, you have to go to work rules, all kinds, anything that minimizes assistance to the people. They are opposed to it. And that means Democrats as well as Republicans will go along. But it hurts Democrats more because they try to sell themselves as being the party of the people.
That's right. Like, they are supposed to be the party of the working class, right? Yep. I mean, that was this image that FDR, like, set in stone that has survived for, 60 years, give or take. That seems to be ebbing away. I guess my thing is, did the Republicans make a pitch for that middle class, or did the Democrats just lose that middle class? Does that make sense? Like, because at the point where you get the majority of people who are effectively workers, the working class, switch to the Republican Party, and it's like, whoa, that's a big deal. I mean, I remember when 30% of the people who voted for Obama turned around and voted for Trump. And of course, Democrats didn't engage that. They just said, well, these people are just clearly racist and sexist and bigoted. Give me your take on that. I mean, are we looking at a generational shift here in regards to who the working class votes for?
Well, I think the Democrats, because of what we just said, they will not fight for these folks. They will instead, remember when Biden was still in it, and his poll numbers were terrible, his approval ratings were terrible. The inflation was eating away at the money Americans had, and their response was, "It's not that bad." And they would find some economic indicator that had nothing to do with anybody's life and say, "You see this Wall Street indicator? It proves the economy's doing okay." And so the subtext of that is, you're doing okay. You're just too stupid to know it. If people say they're struggling, they're really struggling. The gas prices that went up because they were trying to sanction Russia, which impacted global gas prices. So then they tried to, Putin's price hike. Remember that?
They call it Putin's price hike. And then you had Jen Psaki, I never forget it. She says, our values are not without cost. Our values are not without cost. Basically, we are fighting this war in Ukraine because of our values. And those values entail a certain cost that you Americans are going to have to pay. I never forget that clip. And I'm like, okay, for one, you're acknowledging that the prices have gone up as a result of your policies. There's that. And two, you're being pretty cavalier about this inflation that people are effectively dealing with when they're going to the supermarkets buying stuff. And I strongly suspect that affected them on the election. I mean, when the president asks, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? That is a damning question that every president, for the most part, gets asked. And those people said to themselves, prices were less. I mean, it really did go, in many respects, to many people on this notion of inflation. Prices were less under Trump. He might be a maniac. He might be unqualified, but prices were less.
Right. And so people but I also want to mention the people who just stepped out of the process. Kamala Harris got, what was it? The end, 7 million?
Yeah.
8 million. Fewer votes than Biden got. So Trump increased his votes, but she lost votes. So a lot of people who voted for Biden did not bother to vote for her. And it's because of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
This ignoring people's needs, treating people like they're stupid. They're still doing it. I saw a
Yeah.
clip of Schumer, speaking of Schumer, from a recent interview. We just didn't explain very well what we did for people. I'm like, you didn't do anything for people. That's why. And they're still doing it. You're too dumb to know all the great things we did for you.
Yes. Oh, messaging. It's just messaging. We just need to message
Yes.
better. That's all it
Yeah.
is. They are out of, but I will tell you, I've had the opportunity to talk to Democrats. They're in a bubble. Like they are really, I can always tell what a Democrat is going to tell me just based on what's in the media. Like, meaning if Rachel Maddow says something or if something is said on MSNBC, when you run into a Democrat, they're going to repeat it exactly back to you, almost verbatim. It never failed. And I remember I was talking to this woman. She's very nice. Her and I were getting into these arguments, and I was like, "You're in a bubble. You're going to lose. You're in a bubble. You don't see it. You think that you are morally superior and that you are somehow correct, and you and the public is not there with you. What have you done that you believe that the public should get you? Well, Trump is a maniac. Trump is crazy. Trump is insane. Trump is this. Trump is that." It's like, look, I get all that. That may or may not be true, but you're not convincing the public of that, which is the issue. They're not in this ideological frame of reference in the way that you guys are, where you believe that just screaming at Trump or screaming about January 6th is going to be enough. It's not going to work that way. And then after the election, fundamentally crushed, completely unclear and bewildered. And the only thing they can come up with was, well, those people are clearly racist. And those Hispanics clearly were just racist and sexist. And those black men, those horrible black men. I mean,
I think this narrative of Trump voters are just racist Neanderthals, racist misogynistic Neanderthals, and that's all you need to know. And there's no critique. I was just thinking too. I have argued, and I'm sticking with it, that liberal Democrats are the most brainwashed people in the country. They're the most indoctrinated. They are the most. They talk about cult. The Trump cult and the MAGA people are just cult followers, but they're no different from them. The fact that they cannot find it in themselves to offer any critique of the Democrats, and that it's just finger pointing, virtue signaling about how they're so much better and so much smarter than Republican voters is A, not always true, and B, it's an electoral loser. But people like that person you're referring to are they're a big problem because they keep people from moving for. What should be happening now in the wake of Trump's victory is a wholesale repudiation of the Democratic Party.
Agreed.
People who I haven't been a Democrat for a while, but those people who still are, they should be in revolt. So people are going to go to Washington on January 20th and protest Trump. They ought to go to the DNC and protest there.
Why don't you think they do that, though? I mean, like, I agree with you. They're in a bubble. Like I said, if whatever comes on Rachel Maddow's mouth, whatever comes out of the Democrat, it's almost like verbatim, like a robot. Like they just repeat it right back out to me. Like I remember when they was like, Trump was talking to Putin. And she goes like, well, Donald Trump was giving COVID things to Putin. So what? You don't think that's a big deal? No, I don't. I don't care. And in her mind, well, this is a great big deal because, Democrats are saying it's a great big deal. No, I agree with you. They're brainwashed. Why don't you think, though, that they turn their guns at the party and say, okay, you guys spent $1.5 billion, if not more, and you lost this race. You told these people that you were going to win this race. How come, why doesn't that happen? Is it just they're so terrified of Republicans that they feel like it's almost like, what do you call it, Stockholm Syndrome, where they're so terrified of Republicans that they feel like they're stuck with the people they came with? What do you think?
I think Americans are very non-political. At least the moderate leftish, liberalish Democrats are not. They're not political in their thinking, and they personalize so much. This person is good. This person is bad, and they seize on, and rightfully so, ending abortion or any of the other things that the Trump's the so-called Muslim ban, where he prevented people from certain countries from entering
Right.
the United States. All of those things, and those are things to oppose, definitely. But when you
Agreed.
personalize it, and it's just, well, these good Democrats wouldn't do that, and these are just bad Republicans,
Yeah.
then that keeps you from looking at the Democrats and saying, wait a second, didn't you mess up this or that? Didn't you tell us there were moderate Republicans who were going to vote for Hillary Clinton? Weren't your people the obstructionists who kept us from getting a child tax credit? Wasn't
Yeah.
it you who did this or that? So, however, you mentioned Rachel Maddow, their ratings are in the tank. I
Yes.
mean, it's just, it's interesting. Usually with the party out of power, if Republicans are in, people watch MSNBC more. If Democrats are in, people watch Fox News more, but their ratings have cratered. And they're speaking to fewer and fewer people, but we're also indoctrinated. We're told the only change you can get is electoral change. All you can do is vote, and that's it.
Mhm.
So you're told any actions you take are limited to showing up at the ballot box every 4 years. And I know people who only think about politics in 4-year intervals,
Right.
which
Right.
is unfortunate, because actually state and local races have more to do with what impacts your life, I would argue. But anyway,
Mhm.
so we're told that all you can do is vote. That's it. That's all. You cannot ask a question. You cannot make any kind of a demand. God forbid you vote third party. Your only choice is to vote, and vote for Democrats. That's all you can do.
Yeah.
And the cognitive dissonance, I think, is too much for a lot of people.
No, that's fair. I mean, I know when I was growing up, it was that way, where it was like you only have one political party. The party is a Democrat. You don't even need to know who that person is. They keep the monsters at bay, and so that's the group that you vote for. And you grow up and you realize, okay, this doesn't work. This is problematic. So one of
No,
the
it
other
doesn't.
no, go for it.
No, go ahead. I was just agreeing with you. Go ahead.
Oh, so one of the other issues that popped up, Chris Matthews has come back. Now, I haven't seen Chris Matthews in forever. Chris Matthews was the one at one point that says maybe we should lose to Trump, because if Bernie Sanders takes it, he's going to take it for a generation. So Matthews, they're now talking about Joe Biden at his age, saying how he was basically hidden. Because on some level, many Democrats are trying to blame Joe Biden, saying this is all Joe Biden's fault. And it's like, dude, all of you hid the fact that Joe Biden was out of his mind. It was clear that he was out of his mind. If you remember, Raul Castro on the debate stage pointed out that Joe Biden wasn't altogether there, and people flipped out. How dare he says this? How dare he says this? And then even like a week before the debates, they were calling it deep fakes. Any videos of Joe Biden wandering into the wilderness, into the great beyond, like Yeller. Well, all those are deep fakes. Those things aren't real. And then all of a sudden the media freaked out. So Matthews, listen to what he says here.
There was a clearance process for talking to the press.
Right.
There was a clearance process that went through Anita Dunn. There's nothing wrong with it, but everybody had to be cleared. You never heard from the cabinet during this guy's administration. Right. You never heard from them. People like I knew the Kennedy cabinet better than this cabinet. Right. They hid these people because they wanted to have him out there with the aviator glasses being the superstar. And they wanted everybody else had to be quiet. The staff people in the White House never talked. This is interesting. The whole pattern of it was protect him. And I understand there's a reason for that. And it's smart people that know better than we do about his ability to communicate. They know every day how good he is every day, not just when he's ready for an interview with you or Susan, but every single day when they get on the phone.
His point is that they were fundamentally, I mean, at this point, I guess we know this at this point, but that they were managing Joe Biden even from day one. That when they were going, they knew his capabilities, they knew what he could and what he couldn't do. And for the most part, they would say, hey, we can't have this interview today. We need to push this to tomorrow. Or when they sit him out there, they knew whether or not he was going to take on that. They knew that he wasn't up for the job. And yet they hid that. They hid that. And they lied about it. For 4 years, they lied about it. And you got to think to yourself, like, the presidency, it requires, like anything else, a certain amount of energy. And, as you get older, it's harder to do things. It takes more willpower just to do things that you could do in your 20s in somewhat of a normal way. Look at what Joe Biden is, like 80 some years old. And we're expecting him to be up and at him, to be able to deal with the emotional and the energy and the vigor required to deal with one issue after the next. And the reality of it is, he couldn't. He couldn't.
And those of us who saw this in 2020, what were we? They started lying during the campaign when the Democratic establishment decided that Biden was the one. Then they started protecting him. And if you said, I don't think he looks well, which I said, and others have started saying 5 years ago, then they created this stutter. Remember the stutter narrative? He has a stutter. And the weird outburst. Do you remember the dog-faced pony soldier outburst?
Oh, right. Right.
I mean, this was indicative of someone in cognitive decline. But we were told not to talk about it. We were told it was just a stutter. We were told you were a Trumper if you said anything. So then they get him into office. And I assumed that he was going to be a one-termer, that they weren't going to try to run him again at the age of 80 in decline. But they apparently were going to do it. I assumed in 2023, like after the midterms, that he would, they'd be moving towards somebody else. Nope. They thought, I don't know if no one was willing to tell him you're out. And then when they did pull the plug, they screwed it up and tried to have a, 90-day campaign for Kamala Harris. Well, apparently he screwed it up. He was so angry about being pushed out, he endorsed her instead of allowing this process of some kind of mini primary or open convention or something that was that people like Pelosi and Obama were planning. He undercut everybody. He was not well. It was obvious he was not well. Those of us who follow the news very closely saw him get worse and worse and worse. And then he face planted at the debate. And Chris Matthews, I think it's hilarious they brought him back. Remember they got rid of him when he said Bernie Sanders was going to shoot people in the head in Central Park? It was something, speaking of weird outbursts.
And it was someone, Rachel Maddow, where they call him sexist. When Rachel Maddow came to, it was Elizabeth Warren, I believe, where he was interviewing Elizabeth Warren. And I thought he said something and they were saying that it was somewhat sexist. I don't remember exactly what it was. You might be right. I just remember they got rid of him. At one point.
And but now he's back, and then they hid it from us, and anybody paying attention knew that Biden wasn't well. And then finally they're like, well, he's alert before 4:00. I'm like, are you kidding me? The president of the United States is after 4:01. You can't talk to him. You got to wait till the next day. And we still see it. He was in Los Angeles now under, these terrible wildfires.
Yeah.
And he says, oh, the good news is I just became a great grandfather. Who cares? People have lost their lives, their homes, their livelihoods. And he's still, this guy out to lunch. He did it in Hawaii. Remember when the same thing, the wildfires in Hawaii, he goes there and starts talking about a fire in his kitchen. And he could relate to people who lost everything except the clothes on their backs. He's talking about his kitchen. He's been out to lunch for a while.
I mean, these fires have been insane. I was showing a picture of this the other day where the guy was in his house at these fires. I mean, it's just astonishing. I'm curious, from your point of view, at some point you're going to write, I would imagine, an addendum or another chapter to this book, and Joe Biden is going to have to be your presidential book. Where is he going to fit in that book? I'm curious.
One of the worst presidents ever. Biden's legacy is going to be genocide. It is going to be... up until recently, they were trying to get him to start a war with Iran. I mean, this is unprecedented for someone late in his term to try to start a war and stick it to his successor. But they apparently have decided not to. But when we think about the fact that Joe Biden is the one who blew up Nord Stream, talk about causing energy prices to rise, that
Mhm.
this horrible effort to weaken Russia by letting thousands of Ukrainians die, giving
Hundreds of
Israel
thousands.
a free reign to commit war crimes, to commit a genocide, the failure to help the American people. He, I think, is one of the worst presidents of. I'm 65 years old, and he is right up there. I've always said Reagan was the worst president of my life, but I
Mhm.
think Biden is up there as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, when I point that out to people, they often bring up only domestic stuff. And as I point out to them, your world is larger than domestic politics, and the president is doing more than whatever he's puttering around with in the US, especially if he's trying to end the world with some kind of third world war. Like, he's been completely and utterly incompetent. And, I pointed out to the Democrat that I was talking about how I was like, the reason that I think Joe Biden ran was A, ego, but B, also, he didn't think Kamala Harris could win. And she was like, "What do you mean? What do you mean?" I was like, what are you talking about? In the very beginning, many Democrats thought that Kamala Harris was a worse candidate, which is one of the reasons why they didn't think she could win. And now all of a sudden they're like, "No, we always believed that she was a great chance of winning." Okay, sure. That's outrageous. I mean, those conversations are so aggravating to me.
Me too.
It's aggravating. It's super aggravating. So you heard Trump. We have about a couple of minutes. I want to get your take on. Well, I guess I was going to bring this up, but maybe not. The Laken rally act. I'll skip that one because that one is getting more out of the news. What do you make of this Greenland stuff? Where so right here, he's mocking and trashing Canada, saying that he wants to economically force Canada to be annexed into the United States, and in another sense, wanting to basically get and take Greenland. And I'm like, okay, what the hell is this about? I think I have an idea of what he's trying to go after, but right here.
That happen. We're not letting it happen.
Wait a minute.
And
Let's
if
go back to the
Denmark-
beginning of this.
Elaborate again. You didn't rule out military coercion.
Well, we need Greenland for national security purposes. I've been told that for a long time, long before I even ran. I mean, people have been talking about it for a long time. You have approximately 45,000 people there. People really don't even know if Denmark has any legal right to it. But if they do, they should give it up because we need it for national security. That's for the free world. I'm talking about protecting the free world. You look at
You should just give it up because I'm trying to protect the free world. That's all. At one point they says, "Do you have a right to it?" No, we don't have a right to it. We just want it. We just think it's just
Well,
necessary.
but it's funny.
It's
It's easy to make fun of Trump when he's with these wackadoodle remarks, but that's basically what American presidents do. We
Yeah.
want to back Israel, so we will. No, they're not war criminals. We think these charges are without merit.
Yep.
Yeah, we're going to start a war with Russia. Yeah, we're going to antagonize China. He just says
that
what the
was-
rest of them do.
And notice he said, "Well, I don't even know if they have a right to Greenland or not. Like, I don't even know if they own it or not." Basically killing this notion of them owning
But
Greenland.
this, I have to say, it serves the Europeans and the Canadians right
Yes,
for
yes.
being little vassals of the U.S. Denmark
Yes.
is a member of NATO. Denmark does whatever the U.S. tells it to do. Canada does. That little weasel Trudeau, who had
yeah.
to resign, he ran over there to kiss Trump's ring, and Trump just trashed him all the more, which I thought was hilarious. But it serves them right for being such vassals. And so Trump says out loud what the rest of them do. So the real issue I understand is as the Arctic ice melts, you can get more access to, there's oil and gas underneath the Arctic ice.
Yep.
And so now Russia has most of, you look at a globe, you can see that most of the Arctic is Russia, and the US has Alaska. But if you get Greenland too, you can get, minerals and gas and all the other things that could be under that ice.
Yep.
So that, and of course with Trump, it's all, in some kind of crazy way. But that he's doing what U.S. presidents always do. He's just the one who comes out and says it.
And as I pointed out, that's effectively what they did with Ukraine, right? That's even what they did with Israel. I mean, when the UN, for example, when the United States, when the UN Security Council passed a resolution effectively saying we need a ceasefire right now, you got Blinken saying, well, that's a non-binding resolution. No, that's sociopath Matt Miller. Well, that's non-binding resolution. It's like, at what point did a Security Council resolution become non-binding? It became non-binding because we just decided it was non-binding. And even with Ukraine, when they overthrew the Ukrainian government, they called it a revolution of dignity, as opposed to a coup, which is what it was. Meaning, we do this all the time. And now it's being applied to Europe in a way that they don't particularly like.
Yeah, too bad. I mean, that's the way I look at it. I'm not in favor of Trump saying we're going to get Canada and Greenland and the Panama Canal. We're going to change the name of the Gulf of Mexico, which is nutty to me. It's like, the geographers aren't going to stop calling it Gulf of Mexico because of Donald Trump. And who cares? And I said to myself, he's not even president yet, and the wackadoodleness has already begun. But this is the effect of all these countries standing down and letting themselves be bullied by the U.S. This is what they've ended up with.
And last question: do you think Europe is on the precipice of changing? Because this is like pretty humiliating, even for Europe. I mean, even for a vassal, you would think that at a certain point, somebody is like, I can only take so much before my ego gets involved. Like, yeah, I might be humiliated, and yeah, you can treat me poorly. Kind of like Chris Christie. Europe is Trump's Chris Christie, where Chris Christie was standing behind Trump for that speech, and he was just sitting there for like 15 minutes, and they were making memes of facial expressions. That's what Europe is to me, Trump's Chris Christie. But you would think at a certain point, there'd be a turn of the worm, where they're like, okay, this is, you already have us paying 5 times more for LNG. I remember when Macron came out and said, aren't we in this together? Biden, how are we paying 5 times more for gas? Well, sorry.
But they still go along.
They still go along with it. We blow up the pipeline, and they claim Ukrainians did it, despite the fact Joe Biden said, we will stop that pipeline. Meaning they went along with all of this stuff, including the deindustrialization of Europe, including buying more weapons, which is coming from us. So you're getting hundreds of billions of dollars that are coming out of Europe into America, either from gas or from weapons. And they continue to go along with it. And now he's treating them in the way overtly. Meaning it's one thing if he said, my partner's in Europe. He doesn't treat them that way. My vassal's Europe, right? Is there some point where Europe says, okay, enough of this nonsense? Or do you think they just keep going along with it?
They'll keep going along with it. They lost their sovereignty with the EU. They've lost their sovereignty to the US, and they will continue to get beat up as they deserve.
That's so humiliating. Margaret Kimberley, the one and only. She is senior columnist and editor for Black Agenda Report and author of Prejudicial: Black Americas and the Presidents. You can find her on Freedom Ride blog. You can also find her at blackagendareport.com. Definitely check out those articles. Definitely check out the one on Jimmy Carter. I put it on my Twitter feed, and I would put it at the bottom of the video after I cut it. It is a great outlet. She's fantastic. Thank you, Margaret. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Nice to be back. Thank you, Jamal. You too.
Be safe.